office. We also have Kate Lambacker from SEOC. And then we have folks who've been helping facilitate this process, Rob Redpath and David Masnick from Open Data Services Cooperative. Skylar Young from the work group also just joined us. And Howard Askew is stepping in for Tim Hill from the Open Data Institute as our secretariat. Thank you, Howard. I'm going through this because we're not going to do the whole long verbal introduction thing. I'm recognizing the folks who are in the work group because we do value your time. We also have folks who are outside of the work group who are joining us as folks who are going to listen in and are welcome to participate in the chat. This is a fishbowl format, so to keep the conversation manageable, since this is a much larger group than our work group normally is, the work group members have the floor, and other participants are welcome to discuss in the chat. And if Howard and/or I see in the chat that there's a topic that we want to bring onto the floor that someone's bringing up, if it makes sense and we have the time, then we might be able to invite people into the fishbowl if and when that that moment arises. But I promise that anything that gets discussed in the chat, if anybody has an issue who's not in the work group that you want to discuss, this will not be the last time to discuss it. Your voice will be heard. We will follow up if need be to make sure that the conversation continues. So folks who are new one way or another, I do encourage you to chime in the chat, tell us who you are. I am also sharing the notes document where I've created a section for today, but I think most of the notes I do expect we will take in the spreadsheet itself. So, but notes document is here. Everybody should be able to access it. If you have trouble accessing it, let me know. And today we are going to be reviewing the spreadsheet that contains row by row proposed changes that might be involved in an upgrade to HSDS 2.1. So I'm sharing that spreadsheet here. Work group members have been encouraged to review and annotate the spreadsheet in advance. I'm not sure if folks did that. I can take a quick look, but maybe I can get a quick nod or shrug from work group members as to whether you have had the chance to go row by row. Okay, Sarah says yes, Mike says yes, great. And Devin knows this stuff well. And Kate did not have time, but I expect fully that we will get rich insights from.
Oh yeah, I'm not worried. I'll have comments. Everyone else is cringing as I say that, but yeah.
Okay, so we did talk a little bit about the format of how we'll go through this. Kate, you and I had discussed that there are, issues that we know are important and difficult, and I thought it was interesting to think about tackling the important and difficult issues first. But I actually think it might be worth us taking a basic, straightforward approach where we identify issues on which we don't have readily available agreement and table them, and take an approach where we actually try to get as far through the process of figuring out what we are all agreed upon, so that we have a better sense of the shape of the hard things at the end of it. And so this would potentially involve going through row by row down the spreadsheet quickly. And if there's discussion, if there's not 90% certainty around a thing, then we will mark that issue as being tabled for later. Maybe we go back and have more time today, or maybe it just sets our agenda for the upcoming discussions. Everybody all right with that?
Can I suggest that we frame things where we all are understanding that we're not trying to make this a style guide, that this has to be style agnostic, and like detailed style of content has to be set at a different place. It's a different discussion outside of the data format, so we should avoid getting into the weeds of actual content and because that can get very distracting. I don't know that'll happen, but I just want to frame that up front.
Sure. That's helpful. I suspect there might be some gray area where there are issues that seem like content and they are also about format. But that is a very helpful reminder. And that's a very helpful reminder. And yes, Kate, if we bump up against something, basically the format that we're proposing is we're going to go through pretty rapidly. And when there are things that we are not certain about, we are going to describe our uncertainty and we're going to move on. All right. So I don't like any disagreement that emerges from you all. It's going to be valuable. We're going to capture the disagreement and we don't have to work it out right now. It's going to help us figure out what are those things that we do have to develop more specific proposals for with more careful consideration in the future. All right. So with that, although Mike, I did not pre-flight this with you, but Mike and Devin put this spreadsheet together. And I want to defer to them as to how you all want to introduce it and then work us through it. I also want to welcome Shelby for joining us from the Beck Center. Great to have you, Shelby. And I think Brian Hanspicker also joined us. Once again, I'm going to share the notes document where we are taking notes and the spreadsheet that we are reviewing. But again, field by field, we'll be taking notes in the spreadsheet, the notes document. So the spreadsheet is really where to look. The notes document is where I am going to be keeping track of anything else that emerges that we want to take note of. All right, and with that, I think we can jump in. I think we probably can go like, let's go to the hour and then do a check-in on how we're doing. If people need to go take a bio break, you know, at the hour, they can do so. Let's dig in. Mike, Devin, you want to kick us off, give us some framing, and then work us through the sheet?
Yeah, I'll have a go, but Devin, do participate or take over if you think I'm not doing it right, or if you think it would help. Just a very quick introduction. Greg has pointed to a number of to this document, this approaches to this forum post actually, and to this document, which describes when it loads. I'm funning on a Mac. Windows Chrome Windows can take a long time to load these days. Let me forget that and go back to this post. This picture here shows the approach we've taken in the UK initially, which was to extend the HSDS structure. But what we're now proposing is that there is one big core HSDS structure, but we take what we call application profiles, which is sort of filtered views on that for particular purposes. So what we want to discuss when we're looking at this spreadsheet is, should a field go into that extended scope? Most of the proposals are things that are already in there or things which have been added in the UK and have proved useful. And if it's in there, should it then be in one of the application profiles? And we've got this concept of a full open referral, but also a cut down one in for core tables. And then there's a UK one, which kind of matches what we've got at the moment. But we hope ultimately to come up with a methodology whereby anyone can define their own filter on other fields. And that doesn't preclude you from adding extra things locally in a local extension. But what we need to determine today is something sufficiently core that it should be added to HSDS, rather than something is rather specific to your implementation. So you want to extend it locally, but you don't want it in HSDS, or it might be a bit early for you to say that, and maybe in the long run you'd think it'd be an HSDS thing, but for the time being, you want to keep it as a local extension. So the tables we've got listed here are in the order in which they are currently in the HSDS specification. The green indicates fields which are in the current HSDS and the UK profile. The blue indicates things which I think we've added low in the UK, and the white are things that are either in just the US or things that we're proposing adding.
Maybe let me just
Yep.
to add, I think that was great. I just want to give one level of context, which is that, and it might be useful for you to just give people a show of the Open Referral UK website, and that the core reason that we're going through this process, aside from the ever-present desire to improve HSDS, so it's more useful for everyone involved, is that I'm in New York. I work in US-based projects, but the HSDS specification, the Open Referral approach to open data standards for health, human, and social services has spread beyond the US. That the UK team, the people who it's been adopted in the UK and by like official governing like groups involved in local government, and the UK community is large, impressive, mature, has built like a bunch of useful tools that could be very useful to us in the US, and that we want to incorporate. We want to the UK community basically forked HSDS 1 to develop their version of the standard, and so now it's incumbent on us to bring the UK community and the US community, and of course our friends in Canada, and maybe there's an Australian out there, to come together to make this a global standard again, so that we can all share each other's tools, share each other's best practices, operate in one kind of global community that apparently that operates on the internet like a global standards body. So the desire, the primary desire, the number one goal we had for when we thought about HSDS 2.1, I guess this is, or it could be HSDS 3, depending on how people choose to do the nomenclature, was to how do we realign the US and the UK standard so that we can move forward together. And so that's the number one goal. Secondary to that is, are there things that we can do to improve HSDS that we can just kind of do quickly and efficiently while we're doing this, so that the standard's better. But if we left this process just by aligning the US and the UK together so that we can all move forward, as one, with one approach, then we're succeeding. Anything that is just like improvements to the standard is really icing on top of that cake. And so when Mike, if you can go back, so Mike's showing off some of the tools. I think if people are interested, they should definitely go to openreferraluk.org. They've got good documentation there. I'm sure Mike would be happy to talk to anybody who wants to learn more about what they're doing offline. But Mike, if you go back to the, so within that context, if you go back to your spreadsheet, I think that what could be most useful is, 420, 203, 49 is looking at that header. My Chrome does it too with the weighting, and seeing, okay, so we've got I think what Mike described accurately. I just want to go over that header just so everyone's clear that in OR 2.0.1, that's basically the open referral standard. That's basically HSDS of the moment, from the perspective, that's openreferral.org HSDS. Then in OR UK means that field is in the UK version, which is basically an HSDS 1.0 plus stuff that they added in the UK, and did some other tweaks. And let's just go from the top. Let's just keep going here. So dropped from extended structure. I can't, and deprecated an extended structure. So these are things that we want to add. What is this? This is we want to take this from the and looking back at Mike's kind of the graph that he was showing before, the approach that we want to take with this to accommodate all of the different use cases is that we have a core HSDS, which is that HSDS 2.1 is composed of this core that all HSDS format all data sets would have, and that you can then extend it to meet that we will define some extensions that are common that would be kind of HSDS extended. So these are fields that we're defining in the standard but aren't necessarily required or core to HSDS. But then you can also, and we're also want to define further extensions that you can make on your local environment. So this is what Mike was talking about. I guess I'm just reiterating it because I think it's really important, and also because in the spreadsheet here we define a little bit of that. So in ORS 2.0.1 is basically the current, and in ORUK is the current situation, right? These are the two standards that we're bringing together. And then this is, do we want to drop from extended structure? I think that's more of a UK issue. Mike, you want to define that field?
Sorry, which one, Devin?
The one next to in ORUK, drop from extended structure. There
are some fields which are not used and that we just think we don't need. Like the UK has experimented with some things which have not been a success, and we don't want them, so we just want to remove them. There are some which and then the deprecate column is things which may be needed for backward compatibility, but there's probably a better way of doing it long term.
And then add to extended structure would be
new things.
Would be new things that we're adding to the extended kind of the fields that you could add, but aren't necessarily core HSDS. And then in 2.1 core is fields that are the core for the next version of HSDS. That's our proposal. And in 2.1 full is in HSDS extended as well as core. And then in 2.1 UK would be in the extended version. This would be in 2.1 full and even more extended into the UK version of
not more extended, Devin. It's just a different cut on the full extended version.
Okay, so that's like a flavor. In 2.1 UK is, so in 2.1 full is all the fields that we're defining. In 2.1 UK is, of all the fields that we're defining, which fields would be in the UK version. Okay, so I think and I hope that was useful and made sense. I think now is probably a great, okay, and then I'll just to kind of finish off the spreadsheet, recommendation is where we're going to put the kind of note from today's meeting. That seems to be like the consensus note. And that's something that we'll control. Maybe I'm the one writing those notes, or maybe someone else is. We'll figure it out as we go. And then to the right of that is the comment area. And so this is where if you're an individual and you want to write comments or notes, put your name up on top, feel free and add your comments and notes. And we're going to refine, we're going to bring it all together in the recommended column to arrive at consensus. But you don't have to worry about that. Feel free if you want to make your voice heard as an individual, put your name up there and right away, and that's fantastic. So I think that should hopefully that was informative and people are all on the same page. I think now is probably a great time for comments related to anything I just talked about and this table structure. And after that, we'll just go right ahead and go from the top to the bottom. So questions now. If not, ask questions later. But also we're looking at the chat. I'm certainly looking at the chat. And if there's any questions people have about any of this, how we're organizing this, put them in the chat and we'll address them, or type up on the Zoom and we'll talk about it. If not, top to bottom, here we go.
All right, I think we're
Okay.
ready.
So Devin, if you're kindly volunteering to fill in, I think a lot of these things that are in the current one and need to be kept are just things we're just saying yes to. So in that V3, I'm hoping everyone will agree we need an organization identifier, and we can just say we're going to keep that. And I don't know whether you want to do.
Yeah, I'll give it a good why.
Great.
And so why, I guess, will mean, yes, that the field that we have here is the field that the why here is that nothing, really these three, these in core, in 2.1, I'm just going to color these a little bit. I mean, these are really the ones to keep an eye on, as they are, they're the ones that are defining the standard. So if I put Y there, that means that everything in those three fields is correct, or is a yes.
In particular, it's the in full 2.1, because if it is there, it's available to use in a profile, in a filter on that.
In fact, I'll take the UK one out of that, so that we can leave that for the Brits.
Righty-ho. So we've got organization name, which I think people should just yell if it's not a Y.
I'd say throw up a comment. If you have a comment, I think what we'll do is we'll look on the right-hand side if individuals have had comments, and we'll try to address them, or you can throw it into the chat. Best thing to do would be to add your comment in the spreadsheet, so that you're basically registering that we need to have a discussion about it instead of it just being a Y.
Yeah, I can't necessarily fit everything on the screen, so if people have made a comment,
I'll keep an eye.
Yell out when we get to it, will you? Because I think alternate name is something we've not done in the UK. It could be a one-to-many there, but there is a case we've been told for keeping it, so we've proposed to keep that alternate name in the extended scope. So again, no objections to that. Description, email address and URL, again, hopefully non-controversial. So that then takes us on to tax status, tax ID, year incorporated, and legal status. The intention is to deprecate these, the rule being that information should exist in its primary source. So you go away and you look up the organization. We're not keeping a copy of government tax records or charity records or whatever else. That, the open referral is not the place to hold that data. Are we comfortable that they get deprecated? Awful lot of silence.
And with the structure, I mean, the deprecated field does not mean you can't use it. It just means that it wouldn't be in the core.
In Ontario anyway, and in 211 Canada, the tax status of the organization is mandatory. So
I was gonna pipe up and say the same. And then the year incorporated, when we display organizational info, is sometimes something that the organization themselves requests to be displayed because it matters to them.
That's a mandatory field here too. It's filled out for every single agency.
Yeah. So, I'm sorry, was that was Catherine? Did you say tax status or legal status was mandatory for you guys?
Legal status. So, so it's they're not separate.
I've heard a lot of confusion and limitations about these two fields and how they relate to each other.
I should think that tax status and tax ID could go away, and those are also kind of uniquely US. But year incorporated and legal status are a little more general and useful, and we might want to consider those. So
yeah, those are the two for us.
Maybe put those into 10%. That's not a done deal. That's my 2 cents.
Okay.
I can just add that as speaking from AIRS, the Alliance of Information Referral Services, that serves for North America, essentially for information referral organizations. Legal status is a mandatory field. So any INR that's following AIRS standards will want that for sure. Tax status is more of a recommendation and has differences between Canada and the States.
I think we're
is it worth us starting to put together another column of potential parallel to our OR UK? I don't want to call it OR US, but like some kind of, this is not required for everyone here, but there are particular use cases in which it is required. heirs context might be one, and there could be a whole bunch of stuff that falls out of heirs context. Yeah, is that worth something? That could be another column we record here as a thing.
That's something that
interesting.
Skylar and I and others in heirs are starting to talk about the potential for like a 2-1, whether it'll be a 2-1-1 profile or an heirs profile. That does seem like something that would come either after, if not through this process. I figured it was going to be after, but if folks would like to create a column here and start doing that work, it makes sense to me.
I mean, I think the question here is, first, maybe it would be helpful if we define the difference between legal status and tax status. I'm curious what
Sarah, you mentioned that one's required and one's optional, and it sounded like you know the difference.
Well, legal status is tends to be whether they're a nonprofit or a commercial organization, and all of the various kind of options of that. And then tax status tends to be, and again, not as important in Canadian sort of scope, but I know that there's often lists for like the 503C or 501C, that kind of technical stuff, which I don't fully understand, but those are the types of things that fall into those fields.
Right. But that seems like, legal status, like that could be, people could include 501c3 as a attribute of legal status, right? So, yeah.
So Mike, what do you think? Maybe we put these into 2.1 full. Incorporate in legal status.
Yeah, I think we don't I think we should be stricter about adding new fields than deprecating not deprecating old ones. And if there's a need for them, I suggest we leave them and we override that recommendation and we keep them. I mean, conceptually, I'm unhappy because, the way to do it, in the UK would be to include a link to the URI for the corporation and go to Companies House, which would give you all of that information. And by following that URI, the information remains current rather than having a secondary source. But, I do accept that I understand that, the Open Referral Repository is kind of a source of all of that information, and you shouldn't have to go off every time to get it. So, let's leave it there and understand that it may be needed for your 2-1-1 profile. And Rob, if you wanted to create a separate column or fill in a separate column to make those notes that you're suggesting, it'd be much appreciated.
Sure thing.
To your point, Mike, I hope we move that direction. I love seeing the URI field present. I like to see that come in. Likewise with the logo, actually, that's going to be useful.
Yeah.
Cool. So I think we're in a position where we've got Ys all the way down now, because we've agreed that we're deprecating tax status and tax ID from the core and full specification, but that we're keeping your incorporated and legal status. So now we've got Ys.
So does Y agree that we're deprecating, or does Y mean that we're keeping?
Y means that these three columns the two yellow columns are accurate.
Okay, so in the case, so they're not accurate for legal status, which we want to keep, we're saying, are we?
Right. Well, it is because I just put it in the poll.
Okay, great. Sorry, thanks. Excellent. So that's sorted. In terms of adding logo and URI, I think URI would be the way to do what I've just described. And Skylar indicated that those next two fields are useful. Are we comfortable adding those to the core?
Can I understand a little bit more about how you use the URI? This is some like centralized place where you can get definitive information about an agency. I'm not sure if I have any equivalent to that. So yeah, I'd like to understand a bit more about that.
I mean, we're by no means perfect in the UK, but Companies House, where every company registered in England and Wales needs to be recorded for legal reasons and others, issues a uniform resource identifier for each company, and that resolves to a web page which tells you everything about it, including, whether it's under investigation for tax fraud and when it was incorporated and when it was decorporated and where its accounts are. So we just refer people to that rather than keep any copy of that information locally.
Well, I want that.
Yeah.
We theoretically have that, but nobody uses it. I've looked my own company up on it. I know it exists, but it doesn't encompass all of the resources in the database because many of them are informal. There's everything from neighborhood groups, like some of these things don't have accounts.
And we're
It's
the
certainly-
same, Charity Commission doesn't have it yet, informal neighborhood groups won't have it. So we're not suggesting it be a required field, we're just saying it's an option there.
In the US, that's a one-to-many because you've got state registration and the federal registration, two separate ones.
Yeah, I mean, you
I
can
don't
use
wanna-
any type
I don't
of
want to get into the weeds
source.
on that though.
I mean, you could use ProPublica as, the IRS EIN number registries. So, I mean, I think it's a useful thing, and I think we'd all like to see reliable, comprehensive data sets for these types of things. And so I think any database, like, could use its preferred URI or not use a URI. So I don't think I don't hear any objections to its inclusion.
What's
I
the
have a
story on
question.
insured? Go ahead.
And for both of these, well, I guess I've got two questions. One is there a lot of value for people in using a UUID for the organization ID? The U in URI would suggest that it might be a good way of identifying an organization. So if there are, I would be interested to hear from implementers whether having IDs on tables that are separate from external IDs is useful for them, or whether actually those can be combined. And also, given that, as Skylar said, it's a one-to-many, in some cases, like organizations can have lots of identifiers. We've developed orgid.guide to help with that and create a consistent format for identifying organizations, but we can still have multiple values. Is there something that we could look to some other mechanism to store for as much as this needs to be stored within open referral systems? Is there something that should be just added into the table like this, or is something that should be stuck on through something? It's not a taxonomic thing, but the taxonomy mechanism allows for this like extra stuff to be stored. Would that be a preferable approach, or is it that it's a special enough case?
Can you walk me back there? So I feel like my train has left the station. Which UUID are we talking about here?
We're talking about this one, Kate. There are two issues here. One is, if we had a URI, would that be sufficient instead of the ID of the organization?
That would not.
And my
that
view
wouldn't
would
work
be
for us.
no, because this is optional and it's not going to exist for many types of organization. Rob, if I get your second point correctly, it's we do have, and we will come if we get time to it, to the service attribute and other attribute tables, and other attribute can be linked to organization. So we could say we have an other attribute linked to an organization of type organization URI. That would solve the one-to-many issue and would get around adding URI as a sort of hard-coded field in the spec. So do we have views on whether that would be a good or bad thing to do?
Yeah. I mean, I think that this is a broader topic. There's also a broader topic here around, best methods for extracting information from third parties outside the system and displaying that. But that, I think that we don't need that. That's something that maybe we should table for that deeper conversation we'll get to, and we can also, we find it really interesting, something that we can continue onward in another format. But I think for now, what we're trying to arrive at is first we didn't get through logo, so let's try to get through logo, and then I don't think anyone's objecting to the inclusion of URI in the full HSDS spec, but let's talk logo first. Everyone like logo? Any objections to logo?
That's an optional field for us, so that's fine.
Okay. And then now for URI, I mean, I think it's any objections to URI being included?
I like it.
Okay. Now let's keep it moving. Now we're getting to the stuff that the Brits included.
Shelby's commented on that. Let's just and Shelby, do you want to explain your comment? URI is more of an API spec concern.
Yeah, just that, I mean, URI is really only relevant if we're interacting with an API and the resource has URI, which like you might not be necessarily. And so, I mean, it just seems only useful really in the context of interacting with an API. So
Right.
it seems like you don't have for an API spec.
Yeah, but that doesn't discount it. It's just of limited import value. So, yeah, okay. And we're accepting then that we're having URI and it's not going to be considered as a service attribute, we're saying. Okay, if that's the first consensus. Assured date. Now, assured date is something that we've added because it was requested in the UK, but this was by Ian Singleton, and Marcus is sitting in Ian's place today. But I think they ultimately they are very keen that we have a record of when data has been assured, even if we're just saying nothing has changed, but we've looked at it in the last month and it seems fine. However, I think they were convinced that this need not be part of the core. So we're saying we are rejecting assured date as a field to define organization. And the following column is
why are we rejecting it? I want more. I want to take that and just dwell in it and bring some other things into it, because sorry, this is one where I'm gonna, if it's an appropriate moment, there are things missing out of these records that make it impossible to do the job that I need to do. So there are some fields that are metadata on a individual record level that are missing today that I require on a day-to-day basis to deal with the movement of data that I do. So, and also to help my clients who need some of that data to come for accreditation purposes. So not just sort of what you would call shared date in a Assure email, we call our source. And I have update date, update schedule, modified date, a whole bunch of those. Who touched the record when, and the kind of touch it was. And I rely deeply on that data on a record by record basis in order to do data synchronization. And my clients need that data to get their accreditation and to determine whether records are stale and all kinds of super important, critical day-to-day operation stuff. And it's missing from everywhere, and I need it everywhere.
Have you looked at the metadata table?
I did, but it's all like it's churn stuff, so it's not got enough for what I need. And like, so there's the metadata that's about like literal changes on the record, and sort of who did what, which that's not quite what I need. Like, I need to be able to ping for an individual record for doing our reconciliations, where we determine whether we have what we think we're supposed to have. So the same way you would reconcile your books, you know, your check, when we all had checkbooks at the end of the month, and you're making sure that everything lines up and your data set is valid. We rely on those kinds of reconciliation checks to ensure that our data sets are in sync. So, and to also query the set to pull recently touched records, that information has to so there's a sort of an official date on the record saying when certain kinds of changes occurred to that record that the data managers rely on in order to prove that the record was reviewed in a particular way, in order, again, for accreditation and other purposes, or contracts that they have that say that records have to be touched in specific ways at specific times.
Wait, Kate.
Yeah.
Kate,
Yeah.
I believe that you have a lot more in there on this, and this
Yeah.
seems to me like something that we know it does not fit in with what we're looking for in this meeting, which is the things that we agree on. So
Yeah.
Mike and Devin, I'm assuming that this is a topic that we want to table and prioritize. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I think also when we get to the metadata table, it's something that we could discuss more. I mean, what Mike, these are only included in this because at some point in the ORUK process, they had these but then these weren't recommended. These fields are not currently in HSDS. They're not currently in HSDS, and they are literally, if we had said nothing, probably wouldn't be conversation about it.
Okay, so if you're happy that we know that these two are deferred, Kate, I'm really interested. I think one reason we didn't push it from the UK was we thought nobody else would want it, and we didn't want to mess things up. Obviously, you do want it, so I think we
I want it, and it's big brothers and sisters. Yes.
if
I'll
you
also
have
say that
but on-
AIRS is very interested in having that as well.
In terms of on the organization table versus on a service table, on a phone
On
table, or
every
is it-
table,
All of the
on
tables.
every single table, all the tables. Yes.
You see, okay, we need to defer this then. But if you could put your comments in your column or create a column for you, that would help further conversation. It's obviously a big issue, Greg, which merits a discussion of its own.
Yeah, this is the next frontier for HSDS.
Great.
And Shelby is noting things in the chat that seem important. I'm not sure that we want to keep digging in on this, but we do want to capture those insights.
I'll put my comments in the spreadsheet.
Thank you, Shelby.
So
So
I
we're on-
have, should I also be, just because I have a big notepad in front of me right now with other things I want to add, does that mean anything that I want to add, I should just, that's all going to get pinned?
Anything that you want to add should go into your column on the spreadsheet.
Yeah, you should
So
start.
that
Go
but I need a new row. Like there's whole new fields that I want to see.
Kate, this meeting is not for that purpose. So
Okay.
let's capture all of that. It's going to be gold for the future.
Yeah, don't lose it. I mean, I'd want it in the forum, but others might want it elsewhere. Great. Parent organization. So parent organization allows you to define a hierarchy of organizations. We've identified a need for it, certainly in the US, so we're happy that we add that.
I like it.
Yeah, okay, so that's that one. So we've done organization. Right, service. This is the main one. I'm guessing
program.
Oh, sorry, I'm moving too
Everyone always
fast.
forgets program.
Yeah, and
this is a messy one also. I'm sure people are gonna have lots of opinions on.
do you want to talk us through, Devin? Because it's not a UK
I'll talk it through real basically, which is that program is a term often used interchangeably with service in all types of contexts, at least with the groups that I work with. I'm sure in the 2-on-1 AIRS environments, there's more formality around when to use program versus when to use service. So program exists in the HSDS data model in a way that is pretty simple. It ties an organization. It's basically an organizational ID, a name, alternative name, and description. If folks want to continue to use program, we're proposing keeping it in the 2.1 spec unchanged, but that it's no longer in the core HSDS spec. That's basically the proposal. So if anyone has any opinions about that, or I mean, I think that, like I said, there's a whole universe of discussion around what's a program versus what's a service. We're basically just proposing not to change how HSDS is handling this now, but not putting program in core.
I'll make a note, which is that my customers have seen two uses for it. One is confusion with services, which you addressed, and we ultimately coerce them into using the service table, regardless of how they call it internally.
Yeah.
The second is that occasionally they send us records, services which are owned kind of interagency, and they're owned by a program instead of a specific organization per se.
Yeah.
So, well, they want to use that. We haven't supported it yet, but they're telling me like, this would be useful. So I suggest leaving it as an option for that purpose.
Yeah, similar. We've had a similar experience. Grouping. We've also considered the service grouping. We've called it a service grouping as well. But I think unless anyone objects, we continue leaving it as an option. Doug has a comment here, right? often used program as a necessary division of services under agency and before service or site. So it's kind of a piece in the hierarchy related to where service management is located. So yeah, so we'll continue to support it in the spec, and we can continue to develop on it, but not in the core. So I think that's works for everybody.
Thanks, Devin.
Okay.
So service is the biggie. I'm assuming everyone wants a service table and an identifier within that.
There's an argument that it could be a UUID, especially from the
Yeah.
perspective, and I don't know if that's part of this. I just wanted to
Yeah,
raise
I think. Thank you, because I think it should be. I was asking myself, but I didn't want to raise it why it wasn't. Maybe Devin would just note that that ID is a UUID. I think it is at the moment, but it certainly should be. And we can have a separate discussion on why it should be.
So you want me to why don't you type in there?
Say, okay, great. Then service can belong to an organization, so we have the organization field. Yep. It can belong to a program, so we have the program field. Yep. A service has an official name. Yep.
Sorry, just for the program field, just from a perspective, should the program field be in 2.1 full, because it's in the program is in 2.1 full, but not in. Right, before it was like this, it was empty. So it wasn't defined in 2.14 or 2.1 full. So I think for consistency purposes,
full, yeah. Should be in full, yeah.
Okay, great.
That's probably our mistake. So we got a name. I'm hoping, we all need a name. Alternate name, obviously it's a single field. In theory, it could be multiple, but I think it's there at present in the US, so we're proposing keeping it international.
Single field, yeah. I mean, we use it a lot. I don't know if we want to talk about it potentially being multiple fields. We don't use it as multiple fields, but I could imagine why that would be of use.
Yeah, and the same applies to description. I mean, we're getting description like, a different service description dependent on who the user is, whether it's a professional or an end user. So if there are views on alternate name or description and whether they should be pulled off into attributes, now would be the time to say.
I think it would be useful to document recommendations, to have recommendations for how to include multiples using what would be service attributes.
Yeah, I would suggest that's like best practices for implementers, like a guide or documentation, because most applications just need a canonical version. We're starting to dive into the same thing where we have to store multiple versions of descriptions from different stakeholders in the data. And so we have mechanisms for doing that don't require changing the spec. But ultimately, even in that scenario, we track the canonical version. So I think this probably represents the intended use the best. And then we can say it's an architectural thing, whether someone wants to store multiple versions. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's probably worth me saying, certainly we see this as an interface spec. So if you do a get service by its identifier in the API, you'd have an unambiguous structure of the fields. So I don't know how that would accommodate multiple descriptions, an array of descriptions rather than one description.
That's a good point. I hadn't considered that.
And I would also encourage y'all to consider the other use case of linking multiple data sets to multiple sources together, which is still largely science fiction from here, but we know that's where people are trying to go and want to go. And that may involve situations where different sources have different canonical descriptions. So that's a future challenge. Like it's not a present need because I haven't seen people really figure it out yet. Although Kate's experience with SEOC would be like, I think she might come close in her experience.
So can we note then there a future version we may want to formally accommodate multiple descriptions?
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah.
like maybe at some
Yeah.
point internationalization as well.
Right.
But
100%. Yeah, Greg,
for what
you should
it's
feel free to
worth-
add a column too for you. I mean, I think that's you've got good notes that would be useful to capture here.
For what it's worth, we're actually internationalizing all of our HSDS databases right now. And we did architect a solution that doesn't change the spec. So I'd be really keen to have that conversation with you, David, and see if that kind of meets your expectations of what that would look like.
Yeah, we do. We've done multi-language for about almost 20 years. So definitely I have some opinions on how to manage that. And yeah, I have opinions on how to manage that, which may or may not be right, but I definitely have opinions. And ours has been functional for almost 2 decades. So we do know that it does function.
Is it
Maybe-
okay if I reach out to you, Kate?
Yeah. How about maybe what I just added a topics sheet on the bottom of this spreadsheet. Maybe folks who have topics that they want to discuss can like name and describe the topic that they want to have a future conversation on and their name.
Yeah.
And then other people can add comments, and then we can just add them here. I can add one, which is what was mine from my sheet, which was right, how do we handle URIs,
And multilingual international.
right, how do we handle URIs and outside data sets?
Yeah.
Maybe just other people interested can list their names on that. Internationalization, right, we got, great. And then if you have a topic that you want to talk about in the future, just put it on this description, and yeah, and then other people can add it, and then there'll be a way for all of us to connect around this stuff.
And Greg,
And
maybe
just because you put it down does not mean you own the topic. I do not own the how to handle URIs and outside data sets. I'm just documenting that I put it there because we should have an author. It would be difficult to manage this without an author. So yeah, so if you feel like there are issues that you want to bring up in a future discussion, please, we invite you to add the topic there. But to keep things moving, seeing we're a few minutes before the hour, let's keep going down the list.
Just a
Right.
quick question, just to confirm, when you're saying internationalization, are you referring to multiple languages? Or is there
they are,
something else I'm
But I
missing?
think there are other good, it might not be a good term for multi-language because there are certainly other internationalization elements, right?
Okay,
yeah, there's numbers and stuff like that. But yeah, I was mainly meaning language. Yeah, and dates and stuff. But
And-
Is it localization? I think might be. the
yeah,
term.
localization. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I think that might be the term. I can look it up.
And Greg, maybe we can discuss and you can communicate how these topics can be discussed offline as well as in meetings, so we can share our learning so far. But let's not. I've got views on that, but let's not get distracted.
Yep.
So we're on to URL, and I think that exists everywhere, and we're proposing keeping it, including in the core. Likewise, an email address for the service, and likewise service status. Now, it's probably worth saying with status, and I think this was a point you brought up, Skylar, before, these fields in the core feels like status, which might be populated from an enumerated list. We're proposing in the core are just text fields, but an application profile might constrain that, in this case, to a particular set of statuses which are meaningful to its audience. But for this purpose, it's a text field that might be populated by an enumeration, or in your particular application profile, it could just remain text.
And honestly, I think that principle can be generalized. I was thinking about that yesterday. There's a lot of cases where a specific application might make a field an enumeration, and that's fine because it could always be generalized to a string. It's the converse that we can't do. If we make it an enum, then we can't make it, specifically a string. So yeah, I love it.
Great.
Yeah, and I think enumeration might fit as a top, like what are our code lists and enumerations are a good topic. That I'll just put down here because
righty-ho. Interpretation services. We're proposing keeping that, but it's not core. Likewise, application process and wait time. We comfortable with that?
does anyone use that? Do we need any of these? I mean, I think we were keeping them in full because we assumed maybe someone wanted them, but
Application process is a big one.
Yeah, it is.
Definitely would want that, I think, in core from my perspective. Wait time less important.
I echo that. We've used interpretation services as well, but I've never used wait time. None of my clients have that data, so I'm curious if anyone ever uses it.
Every single time someone attempts to use our waitlist system, they stop within 6 months because they say they can't, like it's too much and they're dying and they just stop. So it's a feature that we've had people try and start using a ton of times and it just fizzles because the labor intensity of keeping it up to date just murders people after a very short amount of time, even with small record sets. So you can put it in, but I've never seen it succeed.
Can we deprecate it?
Sounds like deprecation to me for wait time.
Yeah.
I concur.
Great. And interpretation services.
Right. Yeah. Right. And interpretation services is not language, which is a different element here. So I've never used interpretation service.
Pretty optional field generally. Only a few will use it.
Okay, let's see.
It definitely exists, but I can't say that it's prevalent. Like Devin, there are some in DC. I think that there are some services with interpretation services, like Bread for the City has them.
We have not a small number of, like there's quite a few, but we use it, we put it in as one of the things people can select under language services. Like they can pick interpretive services as a language and then define, there's a spot in our language system to define the details. So they just literally make a language called interpretation services and then they describe it in the detail section. So we don't treat it as a separate field. We treat it along with our language set because we allow them to pick like from a predefined value and then specify details about the language or service offered. But definitely it exists in lots of records.
Okay, so it sounds to me like we keep interpretation service. Someone said application process might deserve core status.
Yes.
Yeah,
We use it a lot.
Definitely.
so I mean I'm certainly fine with that. Mike, what do you think? Do we upgrade it?
Yeah, I mean, if people have a need for it, yeah. I mean, obviously you're not precluded from using core. Core was intended to be a cut down, simple starter version, which doesn't confuse people too much, as opposed to something which it doesn't necessarily mean you can't have it. It just means that, you know, if somebody's got a really basic directory, but they want to be compliant, well, they can say at least, you know, I've got everything in the core, or I've considered everything in the core.
I like it. I like it. I think either way, it's not a big deal. So maybe we leave it out in that regard. It's not like you can have a resource database without it, but it's in the full.
Yeah, I'm not particularly expecting anyone on this call to be limited to core, really.
Right.
Okay, I mean, we're down to fees, and this is possibly more controversial because we're saying, do we want fees as a string field, or do we want to deprecate it in favor of cost option. I can't recall whether cost option pre-existed in the international version of the standard, but it's basically saying, you know, what's charged for what. It's a one-to-many on fees for a service. We can keep fees as a text field and optionally and say we expand it in cost option, or we can just have cost option.
I don't
From a
think I
hospital
understand
background,
cost option.
Well, I was
Yeah,
going to say, coming from a hospital background, I feel like that could turn into a black hole.
Okay, so look, I think we said we recommended we wanted to keep it, didn't we? I mean, it looks like we're saying we want to keep it here.
Yeah.
We're using it.
And we do want to keep it permanent. Okay, and accreditations. I mean, accreditations is something that in the UK we call reviews, and they're not user reviews. They're reviews by organisations. So if a local municipality, a council, has reviewed a service and accepted it, then it will be included in some directories and not in others. But you know, by virtue of the fact that somebody has reviewed it, or if you like, accredited it, people have comfort that they can show the service in their directories without having to go away and do a separate review themselves. But these could be reviews from multiple different organizations. So you could have a CBT, professional organization that reviews something, or it could be the state, or it could be a charity that reviews it. So we've got reviews separate. I'm interested as to how accreditations is used in the US and Canada and elsewhere. Is it just a bit of text which says, somebody says this is a good service?
I think more often than not, it's an open text field where they enter whatever license or accreditation it might be.
Ours is a combo of, you can predefine accreditations you're tracking so that it's searchable and you can kind of cluster those records, and an ability to provide kind of generic text information that doesn't fit into one of the predefined accreditation types.
And most
So we
of
do
my
both.
clients don't use it much. Yeah.
So we're keeping it, and it sounds like we might not even want to deprecate it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Licenses, I don't have an opinion on. We don't use it, but if people are using it, assuming people are using it, we keep it.
Treated the same as accreditation.
Yep,
Yeah.
same here. We only have a specialized one for childcare centers. For any other kind of service, it would be under accreditation.
I mean, maybe we can deprecate them, and you can, obviously you can extend if you prefer, if you need a flag for something like that, but maybe I think it would.
Sarah, are these part of the AIRS guidelines?
AIRS for licenses and accreditations are recommended fields under the AIRS standards, but they're not required. So I see a whole mishmash of what organizations collect and how they present it.
This one, like tax ID and like tax status and legal status, the difference between the two seems problematically ambiguous.
So maybe we just lead with accreditation. Maybe we just maybe we deprecate and let accreditation take the weight.
Can we mark this as something we're not something we'll want to get more feedback on? I think that might be right, but I'd want us to sort of check our assumptions maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm conscious we're not yet through this. There are a few more fields, and we were talking about taking a break on the hour, which we've now passed. Do people want to take a short break?
Maybe we break at just let's get through to the bottom of this one, and then we'll break for 5 minutes.
Sure.
Okay, min age and max age. UK people are saying, irrespective of other eligibility criteria, they want this. But there's been a lot of offline discussion on eligibility, and Kate, I know you want to talk about it in detail. Am I right in saying we should refer these two fields to a separate eligibility discussion?
Yeah, although what I have to say isn't complex. It's just that it's essential and that it should be part of core. Like that's a service driving information, and it needs to
Age
not
or
have second
eligibility?
class. Well, age we keep, yeah, both. Both.
Sorry,
But
age and what?
So minimum and maximum age would be mandatory,
Right.
in that they can be blank on purpose, but they have to be intentionally filled for records. And eligibility is a separate issue, and it tends to be a separate issue from target populations that you might choose in the taxonomy as well. Like that isn't necessarily sufficient to cover eligibility, and eligibility is crucial to service referral. And so I feel like it has to be treated as a first class element and not sort of muddled into a bunch of other service detail as a, do what you want kind of item. So that's the extent of my commentary.
So Kate, I'm not sure I understand, because I understand that we're saying the rest of eligibility is probably a separate issue that we need to discuss, but are we saying that you concur with the UK view, which is that we should always have minimum age and maximum age anyway, as attributes of a service?
Oh yeah, I already put that in the notes. So minimum max age are crucial elements of the service. Yes.
So are we happy that we go ahead with this recommendation independent of the discussion on other parts of eligibility then?
Yes.
I think so. Yeah, as long as confirming that it's something that does not have to be filled out if it doesn't apply.
Well, what we're saying is a null implies no minimum or no maximum.
Okay.
Yeah, as opposed, so it has a meaning.
Yep.
I have a data engineer question. It's just an academic one, but do we never run into age striations with gaps between them? Because that was my only concern with this. Like, this is for 3 to 5, but also 50 to 55, and not in the middle. Or is that just realistically not a thing that happens?
It is,
I'm
but
happy
guess.
to say.
So we keep a separate age grouping. I'm awful here. We keep a separate age grouping banding thing on top of minimum and maximum age. That's for search purposes. And also any fine detail gets put into the rest of the eligibility detail. So yes, that happens. It absolutely happens. It most happens when you have programs for parents and children.
Yeah.
Where there are qualifying ages for children and qualifying ages, or sort of like other criteria for parents. And so yes, it can serve adults. It gets, there absolutely that can happen. We manage it through details, the detailed text of the eligibility, and we also have sort of the ability to do, especially for children, like we have a more detailed thing for childcare programs and like sort of what we call early years programs that further structures the data beyond the generic community service. But I don't think we want to go there in this standard.
Well, we don't. And I've heard overwhelming consensus that these two fields are good, but I sent you a tragically long Slack message, Mike, about this very issue. And it seemed to me that in the long term, we might want to move this to the eligibility once we have a more fleshed out mechanism for that, because
we may be saying this can be refined by further constraints in eligibility, whether they are age constraints or indeed all those other constraints that apply around eligibility.
That's honestly the easiest on the data manager, in my experience, is to let minimum and maximum age function for the purpose of searching, use the text of eligibility detail to assist the person doing the referral or the client doing self-serve to understand the intricacies. Trying to make trying to do it in another way, or trying to make that it do all of the like literal possibilities that could happen ends up being a huge burden compared to just saying, yes, we can refine this further in the text. And we're just looking to sort of narrow the scope for the purpose of matching client to service.
Great. So, I mean, and we're not necessarily saying further refinements need to be left to text. We're just saying that's the subject of a separate analysis. But for now, we're agreeing on the minimum.
And maybe it's a topic, if folks want to write it as a topic in the sheet, that it's worth its own time. But then, I think we're all on the same page about keeping max min here and moving on.
I just wanted to ask one thing about Mike, you said that you're going to give null a value or null meaning, which always worries me a little bit. And I'm just thinking, especially for people who use this in a tabular way, I think it's important that we're able to distinguish between cases where people don't have this data and people have this data, but they have said that there are no limits. Like I've seen the JSON response, it matters less because you can just not supply the key. If you're making it, if you do big SQL database, then you're putting null in both cases, and so that's a bit of a concern, I think.
Yeah, I mean, okay, Rob, if you can suggest how we do that, I'd appreciate that. Obviously, if we're saying it's of number type, I never know how you type in infinity in a number field, whereas, you know, it's effectively that's what we want. We want a very big number or a very small number. I guess nobody goes below 0, but yeah, you know, but we need some way of denoting if you say a null should be separated. So if when implementing this and doing the hard work of representing it, you can express that, Rob, that would be brilliant. Yeah. Okay. Deliverable type. I need to remind myself what this is, but it's something that we've got in the UK, and I think we're not proposing having it here. It's the output of a service, and I'm not sure I can go into a lot more detail there, but we're not proposing we add it anyway.
Yeah. Move it along.
No. Okay. And
no, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean by output. Categorization, you're not referring to the taxonomy.
I think it's like a benefit. It doesn't result in a benefit being granted or a service being provided or something like that.
Marcus, if you're still with us and you could put in chat what a typical deliverable type might be, I'd appreciate that. Otherwise, I'd have to go back. I can't remember what it's used for, I'm afraid.
Marcus in the chat, it says one-to-one support, assessment. These are examples of the.
Well, thanks, Marcus.
Okay.
So what do you get? Do you get support? Do you get an assessment?
That sounds like 1 degree has this content, and so we could take that's a reference point for this. I usually don't see that in the field, but there's at least one prominent example of it. But it's not common.
Okay. Assured date is and assured email is the same discussion as we've had before, which we said we need to take off as a separate discussion. Yeah. Attending type. This is how you attend the thing. Like, do you show up in person? Is it online? Oh, sorry. Yeah. I think they are the two that spring to mind. And I think we were suggesting in the UK that we can make this a service attribute. So we will do that unless people say otherwise. Likewise,
attending type. So wait, does that mean it's not in full?
So, yeah, and I'm not quite sure why it's
done.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Thanks, Devon. Let's not talk about that. Yes, I think that's what we're saying, because that seemed to be what the comment says. Yeah. And likewise, attending access. This is the same thing. Like, is it by referral? Is it self-referral? Is it just make a booking? Is it show up? Yeah. Again, we're suggesting that could be a service attribute.
Is that different from application process?
That's exactly what I was thinking.
Yeah, it's a good point.
These things are getting more into like when it's an event. From my limited experience with it, like you're kind of starting to treat a service like a one-off event or something, and you have these kinds of criteria around it, which is a whole kind of can of worms that's been discussed periodically about like, is HSDS suitable for events or not? So I suggest that if there's interest, maybe that's another topic too.
But Marcus is saying it is the same as application process. So I think, yeah, can I just note that here.
So it's not in which case we give it the Y for it being not in the yellow and not in.
Yeah, can somebody note somewhere that it's the same as application process, or can I note here?
I can do it. I'll put it in my column.
Thanks, Devin. So assured email is the same issue. Assured email is the same issue as we discussed before, that we said we were going to defer.
Mhm.
And that's the lot for service. It's been long, but I think it's been incredibly useful. We're going to take a 5-minute break.
I think so. And then, so next up, we have attributes, other attributes. Oh yeah, we got good content coming up, including the destruction of tables proposed.
So don't go away.
So don't go away.
So we reconvene at 25 minutes past the hour. Is that all right? Thank
Devin,
you.
Mike, if you two aren't breaking, maybe we should check in on how we're jumping into those harder topics. But feel free to break if y'all want. I'm just wondering if it might make sense.
I mean, if you want to talk about
they're
it,
not
Greg.
harder. They're just cool.
Okay. All right.
So let's not worry. We can go top to bottom. We'll do fine.
And Greg, if you think any of this should be working differently, let us know. I can't really see any alternative other than to go through this page.
Sounds like it's going well.
Okay, great.
All right, so 5 minutes. See y'all.
Mike, just a heads up.
Mhm.
I have to drive to an appointment pretty soon, so I'm going to take this on the road just in case someone directs the question to me. Pretty soon.
Take this on the road. What does that mean?
I'll be listening in on my phone.
All right, but okay, well, drive carefully. Don't want you having an accident while you're doing that. I know in the UK, if you get rung by a public sector official, and they start by asking if you're driving, and they say if you are, we'll take the call another time.
Nice, that's good.
Yeah, so but yeah, thanks a lot, Skylar, for your input. I hope we can make sense of this. What I'd quite like to do is feed the results into Dom's tool for seeing what a profile looks like. And
yeah, I think this is going really well so far. I'll be here for about another 20 minutes now too.
Yeah, I think we might need another one of these plus the focus ones, but
yeah.
It's nice to see you nodding, Sarah, because I thought, you might say, oh no, not another one.
No, this is actually the most interesting part so far. A lot of the other discussions are just kind of above my head and too theoretical, but this I understand the application.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, and it's really, it's really good to see we're all having the same issues, and sometimes we're using different terminology for exactly the same things. That's why I want to share this, and that's why I push the forum a lot, because that's where people describe things rather than just sort of one-to-one chats, and we can all chip in. Okay, it's 25 past the hour, whichever hour is yours. So shall we move on to service attribute, and the one after that is other attribute. Now, it might be, and Rob may want to comment, it might be as much by accident as design, and it might have been influenced by the UK by accident, that we've got service attribute and other attribute as two different tables, but they both describe things which are associated with an aspect of a service or an aspect of any other entity, whether it be an organization, a location, or whatever else. And they're described by identifying that identity and a taxonomy term which says what we're talking about. So if it were a service, it might be as describing a service type, or SNOMED describing a particular treatment, or equivalent public taxonomies in the UK. Open referral being taxonomy agnostic, but we do ask people to specify which taxonomy they're drawing on, and there's a separate taxonomy terms table and a taxonomy table which defines that. We have a general question as to whether or not we want to keep service attribute and other attribute separate. Certainly it's what we have so far. So if it would break anybody's implementation to combine them and just call them attribute, now would be a good time to say, and then we can look at the individual fields. Is there a view on whether service attribute and other attribute should be one table or two?
I can just, let me provide some narrative context here. If I think I recall that the conversation was, we were trying to evolve past just taxonomy being an aspect of service, recognizing that taxonomy, that other categories might apply to other entities. Even the 2-on-1 taxonomy, really does have codes that apply to other things that are not service within it. But there was a sense that the service taxonomy is the most important set of attributes and needed to be treated as a quote unquote first-class citizen. In retrospect, I'm not able to evaluate whether that is a meaningful choice that is important to preserve. Rob, you may have other context that I'm forgetting here.
No, I think it was just that. I think it's mostly symbolic. It was to say that HSDS is about services, and therefore having having a separate attributes table for that, and mean that you don't have to specify type service. It's implicit from the table, and it saves you. It means you can join directly rather than having to like in a RDBS, you can just join those two tables directly rather than having to do some processing, some interpretation. So there's a handful of pragmatic but mostly symbolic reasons for it, was my understanding from the 2.0 upgrade.
Rob, that was the question I was just trying to mull over. Like, is there a significant difference in performance doing just a straight up join versus a join with a where?
Depends on your RDBS, I think. I imagine so. I imagine if I was making a database, I could probably make that faster. If I was building a system, I'd probably just pull it out to a bunch of internal tables myself. So yeah, I guess it depends on also on your data set, like size will affect it, and your database parameters and so on.
And we're defining this as an interface standard, not a database design standard. So if you do keep the two separate in your database, there's no reason why you can't map them to bring them together in an interface. Kate has mentioned saying,
yeah, we have a whole bunch of different classification systems at play against the same records at the same time. And some of them do apply to sites and agencies. So yeah, we're a bit of we're messing with you, but we need to be able to distinguish several things when we bring in this data, and this data does get shared. So to be clear, this is not internal only. This absolutely is data that moves with the record between complementary systems that keep the same categorizations. So we need to be able, for each of the classification systems we're using, identify which classification system it is, what version it is. I don't necessarily want to ship the whole classification system with the data set. Sometimes just knowing, which classification system I'm using and what version it is totally sufficient. So I'm not thrilled at the idea that I would be obligated, and sometimes I legally cannot, I want to be clear there, sometimes I legally cannot ship my taxonomy externally with the data. So I need to be able to transport the classification information based on the code or name or whatever of the value that I'm using, with somewhere in there some metadata saying what exactly system I'm using. And I need to use multiple systems per record.
Yeah, Kate, I think everything you've just requested is supported, and because we're going through in the order in which the tables are defined, we will come on to taxonomy term and taxonomy, which I think largely address your issues. But when we get there, we need to just double check that knowing which version of a taxonomy is sufficiently addressed. What we're talking about here is in the scenario you've given, where you say you've got taxonomy terms or categories which apply to agencies, sites, and services. In the current situation, if you've got a taxonomy term which describes a service, it would go in service attribute. And if you've got one that defines a site, a location, it would go in other attributes, flagged as a location attribute. And if you've got one that relates to an agency, an organization, it would also go in other attributes flagged against an organization. So what we're saying is, do we keep that distinction, or do they all just go in attribute and we flag one as a service attribute, one as a location attribute, and one as an organization attribute? Does that make sense?
Flexibility of your suggestion. I like the flexibility of what you're suggesting, because then it leaves us open to really add attributes to any core, not even any core table, any table. There's going to be some use cases for that.
So we've got that flexibility at present. We're just talking about combining it. But can I just add that even with a service taxonomy term might apply to different aspects of the service. So you might have a service taxonomy term that describes the type of service, but you might also have a term which describes the intended audience of a service. So
I need a point of clarification, and I'm gonna just pull the dumb card here. I know I'm dumb on this one, but like, to me, coming from a predominantly 2-1-1 background, taxonomy is an incredibly meaning-laden term. And what I'm wondering is if in the broader context of the HSDS ecosystem here, does taxonomy mean any really criteria? Can we put anything in there, any enum or pick list that just doesn't fit someplace else? Or is it intended to be something for kind of like an official, taxonomy or specification of criteria?
Guidance should say that it's public, and I'd recommend it complies with the SCOS standard, but I don't think we can enforce that. We're supposed to be taxonomy neutral, so we're saying put in what you like, but an individual profile might limit it to one that's more broadly recognized, might it?
So then is it not intended to be used for eligibilities, which happen to be pick lists?
Well,
It should support almost anything that you want it to, but whether it does so in a way that's maps onto your concept of how your thing works, or is not awkward to use, and so it's designed in such a way that it can support anything, but some applications of some taxonomies will be so awkward to use in practice that to be almost impossible, is my understanding of where we're up to. So it should support anything from just if what would elsewhere be an enum, just here's a list of things that I've made up in my context, my system, my form. I could put them in, call them a taxonomy. Possibly we should have called it attribute term ID rather than taxonomy term ID. Attribute and taxonomy are not quite used interchangeably, but we had to call the table something, and we had to call the field something. And yeah, that there is a whole page in the docs about what the words mean. And there's a reason the table's called attribute, not taxonomy. But at the same time, I would expect you to put a folksonomy type term or just an enum you made up in the taxonomy term table, because it all uses the same system. Kind of, yes, like it's when we did 2.0, Kate, I know you had a lot of input then, and I think it supports everything.
Yeah, I think we mainly talked about the linked terms quite a bit, and sort of the fact that we had to find official ways to decide how linked terms were going to be represented, because that's a common thing, and we want to all, if it's delimiting the terms in a particular way, and that basically becomes a taxonomy table entry, I think is what we ended up deciding was the appropriate way to manage linked terms. And that's, I'm fine with having a super generic way to communicate categories of any type about a record, as long as I have enough additional information for me to separate out each of the systems that I'm using and put everything in the right place at the other end. Like that's all I can. It can be as, in fact, it's probably better to just have a generic way to do that so people can do what they need. And they're not all taxonomies. So further to your, is everything a taxonomy? We have, I would say, 3 main systems that I would literally call a taxonomy, and that they're intended to really categorize and describe the function of the record in whatever way. But then we have a whole bunch of other ways that we categorize records that are not intended to have anything to do with the function, like distribution lists and other things that are super important for us to be able to track and share, but I would not say that they in any way describe the service. So do you have, does that go in other attribute because it's not intended to describe how the service functions? I don't care. I don't care. Whatever. That's how I would end up making the distinction. If I was sharing my own data, I would probably put anything that wasn't intended to describe the service into other, and I would put, anything that was intended to describe the service into taxonomy. That's the only distinction I would ever make between the two, but I'm fine with them all being one.
Okay, and if you've got something describing the location at which a service is delivered, that's no, that comes in the category of describing.
No, I mean that's anything to do with location and geography is to me a whole other. I consider what we would call the sort of the service area and location to be a classification system, but I treat that entirely separately. Yes.
Okay, when you were talking about your comment talked about sites and agencies, which is what I
meant the records. Like I meant literally, like we have to be able to like add categorizations onto site records, onto agency records, onto program records, because not necessarily to describe a service, as I'm indicating, sometimes it's to describe, you know, we do reporting on this record, so it needs this distribution code so that I know that that belongs in this report. Like there's all kinds of reasons why we categorize information that are beyond describing the service. We absolutely need to.
That's great, Kate. And I think the value fields may merit some discussion in a moment. I've not heard an explicit objection to separating service attribute and other attribute. And I know the UK standards person doesn't like the word other used anywhere. So are we concurring that these can be combined in a future version?
I concur.
I'm fine with that.
Sorry.
Yeah, okay, so I think that's a recommendation, Devin, if you could record that somewhere. And
I think that would be called attribute. It would be, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, so that's where I'm confused. Is this a link table or is this an attribute table as distinct from taxonomies?
Or is it both? To taxonomy.
It's an attribute. Yeah. Attribute
It links
table.
a service or a location or an organization or whatever to a taxonomy term that is in the taxonomy terms table.
I may be paraphrasing Kate wrong here, but I think I heard her resonate with something that I run into too, which is heuristically, there's a lot of data I have to store that just is not a taxonomy. And we've been storing it in the eligibility table, and I've wished that I could link to that. But heuristically, something you guys have been talking about really sounds good, which is to say, here's taxonomies that describe the service, and here's attributes of the service, and I need a link table that just goes to those. That's a pretty wild proposition. I don't want to derail things, but I wanted to put that out there.
My interpretation of what you both are saying, and this may be a leap, is everything in attribute needs a taxonomy term with a foreign key to taxonomy terms. However, you can have a kind of artificial taxonomy term like distribution list address, and if we accept the value field, and I know that's open to discussion, you could put the address in that field.
This is attribute is a general purpose attachment to any service, location, organization.
Yeah.
You can use it as a taxonomy if you want or not, right? I mean, it doesn't. It's not required that taxonomy term.
Oh, you're right.
With an attribute.
Yeah,
attribute is it can have a value. It can have a value that's separate. This could be used to attach pick lists to whatever. It's a general purpose field.
Okay, so does that?
And I think that meets what your needs.
Skylar and Kate are asking for. So okay, so we're saying taxonomy term is not required, and as a result, if you do it without, but you make it clear that your link type is distribution list or whatever, you can populate it with a value which gives you what you need. Is that correct, Kate and Skylar?
Sorry, I was muted. What I would love to see is it just the simplest thing ever. I just want to see an association between a record, the system or that I'm using, or sort of, you know, like I'm using AIR's taxonomy version, blah, 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 and the value that I'm using. So I don't, as I say, I don't want to have to ship my taxonomy table around. I want even simpler than what's here now, because if it's that generic, then the decision about what categorization system you're using is between you and the person you're sharing data with, and it doesn't need to be anything else. If you both agree you're using the AIR's taxonomy, great. You know, we don't need anything more than that. But we do need to know if we're going to shove them all in the same table, I don't want to link to a foreign table of my entire taxonomy systems. I want the system code that I'm using, that the other end also knows what that means, so they can look it up in their table. And the value that I'm applying against that record. And that can apply to services, sites, or agencies, in my opinion, and that's up to the people implementing.
So I'm just going to note that we knew this was going to be a hard issue, and I did not expect us to figure it out on this call, and we could continue talking about it and not really land.
I think we have landed, which is that it's fine. No one that what we're talking about here works with what Kate's saying.
Okay.
works with what Skylar's saying. We can combine service attribute and other attribute.
Okay.
And we can get into the details of that, later when we come with the next version proposal
Okay.
of how exactly that would look. But I think we're in good shape and we can move on.
I think we're there, and maybe when we get onto taxonomy term, we could just check whether or not we're meeting your requirement to publish or not publish part of a taxonomy openly. It is open referral.
I mean, the other option here is to actually have like a system field in this attribute table, because for most cases, I think just having a system or taxonomy in this table as well and a value is probably good enough for quite a lot of cases, rather than to have the extra complexity of going through the taxonomy tables. I just feel that for most cases that would suit, but I don't know if anybody agrees with that.
So there is some text in the spec which allows you to, if there is a one-to-one relationship between values in a table joined by the ID fields of those tables, you can combine them into one table. So effectively, anytime you would just do a join and end up with the same number of rows, you can just do that. And we've incorporated that for Devin's purpose mostly. Obviously, that makes your data less easy to automatically pick apart again. A system that fully implemented the spec would have to be really quite smart to work that out. But in most practical interchange contexts, that might offer the simplification that David's just described within the scope of what the text of the spec says. The schema, there's no way to represent that in our schema, but that give us a path towards that, and possibly a profile could do that. It's worth noting that this takes us out of sort of a spec by, this means that we would have a greater diversity of effective modelings in terms of what concepts went into which tables, but we would retain conceptual alignment because we have the same fields, we've just sliced them up in different ways. So it introduces a bit of friction for interchange, but not as much as having completely different data. Okay, I'm a little lost on that whole thing. I think that I just added a topic for the ideal way to do this combination, and I think we can talk through that.
That needs separate discussion as to what goes in an interface versus what goes in a database table, and the extent to which people need structure it, particularly if all the attributes are one-to-ones, but we can cover that separately. So I think we've nicely covered attributes. Have we, just noting that this link type talks about the entity and the aspect of the entity that we're referring to, but I think we're happy with all of that. So
yeah, and I think that we should have, I mean, Rob and others, we should, as a topic, we should figure out the best way. We're going to come back obviously after all this commentary and all this review with like a next version of this. And for that process, before that process, we should circle up with people to talk through how combining service attribute and other attribute would work best. One of many topics, I think, for just like a little bit, just to make sure we get it right for when we hit the next version or the next kind of discussion. Wouldn't you say?
Yep.
Okay. So let's do. I think we've got almost 50, we've got about 15 minutes left. I think we could get through service at location, and then that would be great.
That would be fantastic, wouldn't it? I'm hoping service at location is not too much of a discussion. I think we've added an optional description field, but otherwise, as is, this just links a location to a service. So are we comfortable with that?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, great. So we then have the issue of location, physical address, and postal address. And it was Skylar who recommended, and this is a big change, but it's a change that, I've had people in the UK saying, why on earth are these three separate tables? And my understanding, I think from Rob, is that these are 3 separate tables because a location may be a physical address or it may be a website or whatever. But if it's a physical address, it might have a postal address, which is currently in a separate table. And we've separate, the original spec separates out location, physical address and postal address. And Skylar has suggested that we merge these, accepting that not all fields are applicable in all circumstances. So we've got, with location, we've moved in the fields from physical address as optional fields, but we've got extra fields like the URI. And Skylar, I'm probably not doing this justice, and I know you've got to leave soon, but we're moving all the fields into one table, and we're saying whether or not it's a physical address or a virtual address. Yeah.
Well, yeah. I made 2 propositions, which is, and one is, I think, less controversial than the other. The first one is that we should combine physical address and postal address into just address with a type field, which defines what type of address it is. Just in the same way that our phone table, includes the phone number, but that could be a fax, SMS, TTY, all kinds of types of a number. And I've discovered that works really well. So it just seemed to me that we should combine those 2 tables at minimum. It's more controversial to suggest that we should add or denormalize the addresses into the location table. And that, I think, is more the discussion for the group, really. It could be done. Really, most of my client databases do it. But I do see Rob's point, and to Shelby's question in chat. I mean, with the dawning of Meta and things like it, we know that there will start to be virtual locations for certain that have different kinds of descriptors for where they are.
Shelby is asking what a virtual location is, and it could just be a service that's delivered entirely online, could it? And Shelby's also asking about, are we using location for sites? Yeah, that we don't use the term site anywhere, do we? So we do, by location, we mean a
site. Yeah.
That was for Catherine. So
yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, yeah, that's our internal terminology is actually organization location service, but we also end up using the errors language a lot too, and I mix them up. So I apologize. I'm using them interchangeably.
No problem, and thanks, Shelby, for confirming that for Kate. So Kate, we understand you've got physical, mailing, and virtual. We would support them all, but Skylar, you're saying there's a bit of redundancy if we're using the location table for everything, because in lots of cases, all those address fields would be empty. Yeah.
Yes, sometimes that's the trade-off. Sometimes all those fields are going to be empty because it's just a web address or something. There's edge cases where that's true. So I'm curious to see what people's thoughts on this. Is it worth denormalizing it all the way down to location, or does it make sense to have the address table still separate?
Right. Yeah. And maybe let's can we frame the conversation from maybe the top down, or the bottom up rather, which is, can we combine? Is there any reason why we can't combine physical and postal address into a single table?
Anyone object?
So I just want to make sure I understand how you're going to combine them, because we, in the same, what I would call a site or a location, I, as I said in the chat, it will have like a physical, a mailing, and a virtual at the same time in our system. Like there's one record we're calling a site or a location, and it can have 2. We can have infinite physical addresses and a mailing address and a virtual address, but we still view that as a one single site delivery location.
Right.
Just because it happens to have a separate mailing address, we don't make another offshoot site for that. And if it was, if that had both virtual and in person, if it's still run by the same staff and still considered the same site delivery location, even though it might be virtual or physical, it's still classed under the same site in our record.
So yeah, so I think that that the way we would handle address would just be the same way we currently handle physical address, but adding a field where you can define whether an address is physical, postal, or virtual. So I think that would accommodate your need there.
Yeah.
But
Can
it
we
does-
get mail care of or something equivalent?
So I'll frame up the second question before I.
I mean, I think that's a good, well, yeah. I mean, I think we definitely, I mean, why not, right? I mean, should we add a care of optional field to address?
Or of our
Probably.
attention, like that's pretty crucial for
Yeah,
us.
I like that.
I think that makes sense.
We've got this location type, and we're talking about whether that's physical, postal, or virtual. Kate's just mentioned care of, but there is,
Right.
we've also mentioned the fact that you might be combining these.
Well, I think what I'm hearing right now is that combining everything into location is difficult to imagine, that because locations really can have many different addresses, but that combining physical and postal with a type field and adding a care of would be the proper format for a combined address field, a combined address table.
So that's really the crux of the question, and I'll pose it that way. Can we assert that one location or one site may have more than one physical address? Shelby says we can assert that. So I think that pretty well establishes the case then, like combining the two address tables is a go, but denormalizing them completely into location is a no-go.
Yeah,
Awesome.
that's
Thanks,
what I'm
Shelby.
doing too.
Shelby, what's the scenario when one location has two physical addresses?
Well, I guess maybe I'm thinking more about like having a postal a location could definitely have a postal address versus a physical address. I'm also thinking about things like hospitals, which might have like a main address, but also different addresses for different things. But depending on provider, you could like say those are different locations, but like it's actually, you know, all in the same block or whatever, but might have different.
That's great. Thanks. Yeah, get it. Yeah. So we're doing that split of the first one, but we're keeping postal address separate. Link to location. Have you got that?
So I think the articulation I have here is that we should add, whoops, well, I kind of did this. We should add a care of, we should create a combined, we should combine add the postal and physical addresses into a single table with a type. We should also add a care of field to that address table. You might call it attention.
Hang on, we got that right. My understanding was we're combining location and physical address, but we're not combining in postal address.
No, that's wrong.
That's wrong.
I think we're combining physical.
We're pulling the address out of location and into a separate address table and having one address table, right?
Right, yeah. One
Okay.
address table combining physical and postal, and we're preserving the location continues to exist kind of as it does, with you know, where it can be combined, it can be linked to numerous address tables, address rows.
Great, as long as you've got
And it should say the type between physical and postal in that
Right.
generic address table.
Yeah, so we should combine postal and physical addresses into a single table with a type. We should also add a care of field to that combined address table. But we should not to that combined address table, but we should not combine address with location tables. So that's in that note is on the location recommendation here, bolded.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right, that is excellent. Thank you. And we've got a similar discussion on the assurer for the location, which we said we'd postpone. I think other than that, I think we've addressed this, haven't we? And this might be a good place to stop and Greg round up for now.
I think so. Yeah, I think so. Unless we want to just power through phone. phone, yeah, no, let's stop now. I agree. I think we have two projects, I think, in summation, from my perspective, we'll do another kind of synthesis of this where we'll take everything from location table upward, and we will come back with a refined version of this that has the addresses combined, that has attributes combined, and the rest of the recommendations that we've discussed implemented, and then we can start then and again, going from, we're basically halfway through. Okay, a third. So I think we hit the biggest stuff.
Okay, thank you all so much. Sarah, if you could help me make sure to get the chat from Zoom, and we'll be posting the video. We'll synthesize the notes. We will schedule another one of these possibly in August. I'm hoping the first half of August. Would welcome your suggestions for any other sort of formats in which we might explore some of these topics that sort of span multiple fields in their considerations. All right, thank you, everybody. Right.
Thank you.
I was going to say, if you have a few minutes,
What was that, Devin?
we have this topic list. There's like 10-ish topics. I think it would be best to conduct that conversation if people are comfortable in or whatever conversations we can conduct in the Open Referral UK forum. I think it would be great to do. If people want to kind of create a topic in the Open Referral UK forum with these topics, they should feel free. And if they have any questions about how to do that, they should probably ping Mike, and he will onboard you into the forum appropriately.
You think the forum instead of, say, GitHub or both?
I don't have a forum account.
We can get to that, but
Create your own. I mean, yeah, maybe we could just start an introductory topic for each and circulate the link. And yeah, I mean, Kate, it'd be really great to have you there. I like the forum because all the discussion is in one place, and there's a kind of it's threaded and it's slightly more human readable than GitHub. And we certainly have a user base that's not techie enough to use GitHub.
okay.
So I will do my best. I want to give a little, Gray already knows this, I'll give a little warning. I'm running everything by myself. And so I kind of rely on these scheduled things where I carve out a time to concentrate on this.
But she's good. She's good at getting back.
So when I participate, I'm 100% here, but I will say it's challenging for me sometimes. So I will do my best. Without scheduled things, sometimes it's hard for me to allocate the time. I will do my best.
Yeah, no. If people like it, they should feel free. They should reach out to Mike if you have a question about how the forums work. Maybe Mike will get them started. No one should feel obligated to discuss in the forums. We're going to keep doing these in-person things, so you shouldn't feel like you're missing out. But we might refer to the discussion in those things when we have the in-person. And the discussion in the forums might get referred to in these things, but don't worry.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Right on. Take care.